This is Brad Zaitzoff from INETCO, and I'm excited to welcome you to the INETCO webinar, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Transaction Monitoring and Analytics, presented by INETCO's VP of Product Marketing, Mark Forbes. A few quick notes before we get started. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll be sending you a link to the recording, so you don't need to be frantically making notes during the presentation. Today's webinar will take about 30 minutes, which will leave us 12 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. And the chat facility is live, so should you have any questions during or at the end of the presentation, please send those through to the host. And with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mark.
Great, thanks very much, Brad. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Forbes, and over the next 42 minutes, or as close to that time frame as we can get, we're going to talk about how to justify an investment in transaction monitoring and how to begin to evaluate the range of products that are available to you on the market. Let's first start off by looking a little bit at priorities over the years. So if we zoom back about 6 years ago and you thought about your ATM and your point of sale environment, your priorities were really security, introducing new functionality. You probably had some of your own. This list kind of varied from bank to bank or processor to processor. And then maybe you thought about putting a coffee cup holder on the side of the ATM for a convenient place for people to put it. And then you thought about ATM and point of sale transaction monitoring. It just, at the time, you had your hands full handling the basics of a large and growing fleet of ATM and point of sale devices. And really it was about how do you deliver the security and the functionality that your customers expect? Well, and as we zoom forward now and look at 2014 and where we stand today, security still tops the list. There's no surprise there. New functionality, still very high on the list. A lot of us are adding value-added products and services, trying to take that ATM real estate and use it for more capabilities, and the same thing at point of sale. But I'd argue that ATM and point-of-sale transaction monitoring is moving up or has moved up the list significantly. And, I'm only being slightly facetious here because really business intelligence and the need for analytics and a better understanding of what's happening is a very, very key priority in the ATM and point-of-sale channel. And as we'll see over the course of this presentation, ATM and point-of-sale transaction monitoring is one of the best ways to capture the analytics and the business intelligence that you need to optimize the channel. So then from there on, your priorities continue down, and of course those coffee cup holders are still somewhere on the list, but never quite high enough for you to really do anything about it. Now, if you're still planning and transaction monitoring is not something that's quite on your roadmap yet, but you're thinking about business intelligence and analytics, don't panic. We're going to talk a lot about how to build your business case and construct a value proposition around this. But I guess the question that I want to leave this slide with is, why has point of sale and ATM transaction monitoring shot up the list? Why has this need for business intelligence and analytics on your ATM and point of sale fleet become so important? And there's 3 reasons for this from what I've been able to discern talking to both retail banks and payment processors. One is the strategic importance of the channel. I think we all acknowledge that self-service is becoming a greater and greater component of the financial services landscape, that payments revenue has become certainly since 2008, has become a very, very nice, stable, profitable source of revenue that banks are increasingly willing to invest dollars in preserving and growing. It's really seen as a strategic source of revenue. And then finally, we're all very focused on the consumer experience, and things like, be it the iPhone or the experience that customers are having with mobile banking or apps, has really raised the standard for what's expected of a self-service interaction. And so all of these things combine to make the channel, both ATM and point of sale, of real strategic importance for most banks and processors. The second thing is, over the last 6 years, we haven't stood still. We've introduced a number of new products and services at the ATM and at point of sale. And those have kind of fallen into 2 categories where we're doing more value-added services. So point of sale, perhaps you're doing dynamic currency conversion and you weren't doing that before. You're offering, you're offering tipping functionality and other aspects to the screen flow, choice of payments, things like that. And then on the ATM side, you may be adding new products like new value-added services, the ability to do a mobile top-up or purchase a prepaid card or things like that. And then on the flip side of this, you're also looking to offload more and more branch transactions out to the ATM. So taking things like scheduling and appointment booking and moving those into the ATM and doing envelope-free deposits and things like that to really, again, just try to take more transactions out of the branch and onto the ATM. And then finally, the overall environment behind your ATM and point-of-sale devices become much more diverse and complex. Most customers I talk to today are running multi-vendor fleets, both software and hardware. Many are moving from a monolithic switch, a single base 24, for instance, to a distributed switching environment where they have a number of different components that comprise their payment switch. And increasingly, they have transactions that don't touch a traditional payment switch, that execute through more of a traditional web services interface or go off to a third party. And so these three things combine where the channels become strategically important, so we want to keep a closer eye on it. We have new products and services running that are different than what we are used to monitoring at the ATM and point of sale. We've gone beyond the deposits and withdrawals. And third, the overall architecture and technical makeup of the system has become much more complicated. So these three things, in my mind, are what has driven a much stronger interest in transaction monitoring over the last few years. And so really there's a fundamental shift here where transaction monitoring in 2008 was kind of a nice to have, and it was only a few retail banks and payment processors that were able to really build a case for it, to a point where now when I walk into a room, I hear customers say, until today we didn't have a business case, or until this year we didn't have a strong enough business case for transaction monitoring. The implication there being, of course, now they do, and now it is a priority, and it's a must-have. And that changes the way that you're going to look at it from an investment standpoint and the way that you're going to look at it as part of your business. Now, one of the, I guess, benefits of my role is that I spend a lot of time in elevators trying to explain very succinctly and quickly to people why they would want to do transaction monitoring. And having been at this for 6 or 7 years now, I'm very used to convincing people in a short period of time. So this sets me up very well to give you a good way to explain transaction monitoring to senior management. So transaction monitoring helps you get to the heart of transaction issues that impact your revenue, that consume excess resources or strain your resources, and that degrade your customer experience and dissatisfy customers. It's as simple as that. Transaction monitoring helps you find lost revenue and recapture it. It helps you reduce the strain on your operational resources, and it helps you deliver the best possible customer experience. That in a nutshell is what it's about. Now you can translate this into business benefits. You can talk about the need to ensure reliable and secure customer interactions, and transaction monitoring is a critical component of because it can watch every single customer interaction and measure how successful it was and what could be improved the next time. The second reason to use transaction monitoring is to enhance the profitability of your fleet by getting that next level of information about what's happening. What kind of customers are actually using different ATMs? What transaction types are they using? What types of customers or what types of interactions are faster or slower to handle at the ATM? Which of your point-of-sale terminals are more reliable than others? All of that can help you both increase revenue within the fleet by finding opportunities where you're either losing revenue today or you could be making more, and helping you reduce the operational cost of managing and monitoring and operating the fleet. And then the final business benefit of transaction monitoring in terms of managing the expansion of your fleet, helping you acquire customers more effectively, and helping you actually market the services that you're offering more effectively as well. So once you've got that value proposition down, then you need to start to build a business case. And here, I think there's no better way to do this than to ground this in the experience of other customers like yourself. And so I'm going to give you examples as we go through this and throughout the rest of the presentation from what we've learned working with our customers. The first area that I've seen a number of customers build a business case, including one of the largest processors in North America, is around the ability to discover problems earlier. Their entire business case was built around the fact that it took them between 4 and 8 hours to discover and understand an issue. And that was typically 4 to 8 hours after the customer reported the issue. Today with INETCO Insight Transaction Monitoring, they are within minutes, even seconds of that problem occurring for the first time. They're typically finding problems and spotting them before their customers are ever aware, and they're often fixing them before their customers even notice. So this makes just a huge difference in terms of their ability to be proactive as an organization and to really offer that kind of fast, proactive response as part of their value proposition to their customers. The second area that I would say every single INETCO Insight customer is able to build a business case is around troubleshooting issues faster. So this is about eliminating those war rooms that happen when you have an issue and you have to bring network and application and switch teams together into the same room. This is about resolving issues 65 to 75% faster and being able to avoid the need to recreate a problem, or worse yet, ask a customer to try to recreate a problem so that you can diagnose it. So the second business case gets built around troubleshooting faster. The third is all around business intelligence and analytics, the ability to improve your decision making. And this could be at the operational level where you're able to minute by minute, second by second, improve your visibility of the environment and your ability to spot anomalies and decide which ones to act upon. Or it could be the more thoughtful, channel-oriented view of trying to analyze patterns and trends and profiling performance so that you can really answer all of those questions that you have about your ATM and point-of-sale fleet, but likely don't have either the data or the time to answer today. And there's a whole business case around optimization here. And then finally, there's a business case to be built around risk. As you look at the way that an ATM or a point-of-sale environment has evolved, where it used to be that we had 6 transaction types coming into a single base 24 switch, now you may have 30 transaction types, and of those 30, still only 6 go to a base 24 switch. And perhaps that's not a base 24 switch anymore, it's a distributed Postilion switch that's running across 5 or 6 different nodes. So you have blind spots, is my point, in that transaction flow. There are transactions you likely aren't monitoring today. There are parts of your switching environment you're not able to see into today that you've either outsourced or distributed. And every one of those blind spots is a potential risk to the performance and the security and the reliability of your environment. So there's a business case to be built here around driving risk out of the environment and ensuring you've got a reliable, secure operation. Now, once you've built a business case, the next thing is triggering the investment, finding that single reason that gets everybody's head nodding, including the senior executives who need to sign off on the budget. So here there's a lot of different cases that we present, and there's a companion white paper to this presentation that gets into detail on these. But I'm going to highlight a few that are kind of snatched from our customer base, and those are the ones in bold. So we've been working with a retail bank in Africa who was trying to ensure that they had a really consistent customer experience across channels. As many of you know, unlike a lot of other regions where ATMs came first and then internet and then mobile, in Africa, in many cases, all of those channels came online at virtually the same time. And in fact, the ATM channel might be behind the mobile channel in terms of usage and sophistication. But this bank was trying to ensure that they had a really consistent customer experience across all those channels. And that was their trigger, was this consistency project. And INETCO Insight gives them visibility and the ability to capture metrics from every one of those channels and see how they're doing. We've had a number of customers over the last year who've been doing strategic upgrades to their ATM and point-of-sale management and monitoring software. Many of those are moving to products like NCR's AppTravision, for instance. And a big part of this is not just getting that device-centric view of what's happening, but they're also realizing they need and want transaction data to complement that, so that they can see if we have an outage window of an hour at this particular ATM, how many transactions did we lose, and therefore how much revenue was at risk, or did we actually lose during that period in time? And then the third case was we've had a couple of banks in our base who have done significant outsourcing. They've outsourced significant components of their switching environment and their network environment, and they were encountering issues with third-party service performance. So they were able to use INETCO Insight to establish and to monitor service-level commitments. And in fact, our very first customer for INETCO Insight was able to pay for their software purchase twice over in a credit that they received from their telco or their network service provider because of the data that Insight was able to help them to produce to help them with a dispute they were trying to resolve. Okay, payment processors, a little bit of a different world, but I'm going to share some experience here as well. We have a large processor customer in Africa who has been adding a number of new value-added services over and on top of the traditional point-of-sale transactions that they offer and ATM transactions they offer. And a big part of this was getting visibility into those transaction flows, some of which did touch the switch, some of which didn't, and being able to really watch before, during, and after, and through their development, their test, and their production environment, how those transactions were performing. Second customer was undergoing a major payments hub strategy or payments modernization initiative, and they were moving from a monolithic switch to a distributed switching environment where transactions would kind of route amongst multiple nodes in their switching environment based on load and based on geography and failover policies and everything else. And so they needed to go from a model where a transaction came into a switch and went out to one where it may make 5 or 6 different hops across geographies in order to execute. And they wanted that traceability on the transaction. And finally, we're seeing a number of payment processors embark on operational efficiency projects. And what they're trying to do is trying to get to a place where fewer problems are escalated to their Tier 2 or their Tier 3 support personnel. In other words, more are resolved at Tier 1. And they're almost trying to create a Tier 1.5 component to their service desk where there are some more skilled, better tooled staff members that are able to handle a much broader scope of issues. And again, INETCO Insight and transaction monitoring is helping them equip and tool up those folks. Okay, final major component of the presentation is to talk about the top 10 questions to ask in your RFP. Now this is actually, there's a companion document, as I mentioned, to this presentation where we actually pulled together the best of the best questions from several dozen RFPs and RFIs that we've received over the last year or so and distilled those down into a document that we'll share with you. But I wanted to just take a moment to pull out what I feel are some of the best or most important questions that really get at the core of what we think at least you need in a transaction monitoring package. The first thing is, can it monitor every transaction? Can it monitor value-added services? Can it monitor envelopeless check deposits, appointment bookings, dynamic currency conversion? Or does it just monitor deposits and withdrawals? Because there's a big difference, especially when you look at the way that your environment is likely evolving. Can it monitor successful transactions only, or can it monitor transactions that never touch a switch or break somewhere along the way on the network? That's important as well. Second question, can you see the exact transactions that triggered an event? Most of us in the ATM and point-of-sale world are used to dealing in individual transactions. We're accountable to individual customers, individual cardholders. And yet most transaction monitoring software actually only takes a sample every 200th transaction or every couple of seconds it does a detailed trace of the transaction. But otherwise, it's just keeping aggregate statistics, which is not enough when you're trying to actually locate an individual customer's transaction without fail every time. A number of customers, when we come in the door and first begin the conversation, they have several dozen monitoring tools, and their operations team literally swiveling their chairs around between these tools to try to get a pulse on what's happening. We believe one of the things you should be able to achieve with transaction monitoring is to get yourself to one or two screens to give you a good view into the health of your environment. One of the largest payment processors in Africa, you walk into their operations center and they have two INETCO Insight screens up. One is a bunch of dials and gauges that shows their transaction rate so that they can see what their volumes look like and that they are kind of matching what they would expect at that time of day. And the other screen is a filtered view of their real-time transaction flow that's designed to highlight failures. And if they see that screen start to fill up, they immediately jump into action. They expect it to be blank, which is kind of an unusual way to use the screens in the product. It's not pretty, but it sure does work for them. The fourth point here is, does the transaction monitoring system you're looking at have a search function? And this may seem blindingly obvious, and yet there's a number of products out there calling themselves transaction monitors that don't actually have a built-in search function because they don't actually store transactions for you unless you write a bunch of script and send those transactions out, usually to another log analytics tool where they can be scraped and parsed and searched. So you really want to look for built-in search because from what we've seen, it is one of the single most important and popular use cases for customers of our software. The fifth question you want to ask is, what happens to all the data that's generated? Because all this transaction data is really, really interesting and valuable, both from an operations context as well as from a business planning perspective. And yet when you look under the covers at a lot of ATM and point-of-sale transaction monitors, they'll have a suite of a dozen reports that demonstrate very well and that look very pretty in your initial demo or proof of concept. But when you start asking the hard questions about, well, what if I want to modify this report? What if I want a different slice of data? You're going to run up against proprietary databases, and you're going to run up against very expensive custom consulting projects in order to produce the reports that you're looking for. Our approach with INETCO Insight is to offer very open, free access to the data. So we can put it anywhere you want, and you can use it any way that you want. Question number 6, does the product produce useful statistics? Ultimately, this is about transactions, but it's also about the intersection of transactions and devices. So for instance, you may want to be able to see, which are my most successful devices in terms of approved transactions? Which ones perhaps have the most failures or the declines or the slowest response times? Those types of statistics are very important, and it's important to have a product that can begin to calculate those for you. The next 3 questions really get into deployment. Can you deploy the product without disrupting your production environment, or do you have to go and install agents on every ATM? Do you have to go and update your switch or run a process on your switch, or do you have to tail journals or something like that? Products like INETCO Insight can capture the data right off your network and have zero impact on your production environment. And similarly, can the product see every transaction in production at full load? We've seen a number of customers using legacy transaction monitors where, because of the overhead these products introduce, they actually have to turn them off as they're coming into peak load periods like Christmas, Thanksgiving, or holidays, because the products consume a certain amount of overhead that they want to use and have available for their production operation. That seems like an unreasonable trade-off to us because that is the exact time that you want detailed visibility into what's happening in your environment. And finally, we're seeing, question number 9, we're seeing some more generic application performance monitoring tools trying to position into the financial services segment. And yet, as we all know, we have some very specific, strict compliance regulations in financial services around PCI. And Unfortunately, when you look under the covers of a lot of the generic application performance monitoring products, you see that there isn't really a security model built in there to handle PCI. So as a result, there's a very good likelihood that the entire system will be in scope for a PCI audit, and that the auditors are not going to be happy with the way that sensitive and forbidden data are handled in the product. A product like INETCO Insight has been built from the ground up for the payments in the financial space. You'll find we have a very, very rigorous security model for how this information is handled. We've been through a whole spate of PCI audits over the last 7 years in numerous customer sites. And in many cases, because of the way that the Insight system is designed, it's actually fully out of scope for the PCI audit, which is kind of nice. Fewer things in audit in scope, the better. And the final question I think you need to ask, and it's, again, blindingly obvious, is this product used by someone like me? As you look at the different transaction monitoring options, you'll see that there's a smattering of them out there that are deployed in very, very large processor environments where someone's dedicated to the care and feeding of it and has become an expert in the tool. But as you get down below those levels, those huge base 24 reference accounts, you're going to find there really aren't a lot of transaction monitoring products deployed in those types of settings, or ones that are in Fastillion environments, Connex environments, so you name it. INETCO Insight has been deployed everywhere from quite small credit unions with a couple of billion in assets and a handful of ATMs in their fleet, all the way up to some of the largest card processors in the world. So we're able, because of the way the product deploys, the way it's architected, the way it's priced, we're able to deploy across a wide range of cases. So I want to finish up because, again, I've talked a lot about different examples as I've gone through. I haven't named any customers, so let's name a few customers now. Here's an example from Moneris. Their value with Insight is really getting better coverage of their environment, getting that system-wide view, which they just didn't have before, and is allowing them to resolve issues 65 to 75% faster. Blue Shore Credit Union was able to use INETCO Insight to help them migrate to a brand new core banking system. And as a result, they were able to achieve a return on their Insight investment in less than 2 months, both by not having to hire full-time operations staff to watch their system and stare at blinking lights, and also to be able to achieve their migration on time and on a budget. And finally, Telecom New Zealand was able to call INETCO Insight their best payback project of the year, because they were able to use the product to actually power their billing system and be able to improve the accuracy of their billing process because of the quality of the data they were getting out of INETCO Insight. So these are just 3 examples drawn from our customer base. As I've been going through, even though I haven't been naming customers, I've been giving you a lot of live examples of what we've seen from customers, as well as what we've seen across several dozen RFPs in the past year or so. So with that, I'd like to open the lines up for Q&A. I'm sure some of you have been putting questions into the chat line as we've gone along, and Brad's going to start reading some of those out, and I'll answer them here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you everyone for sending through some questions. Got some good ones, so hopefully I'll be able to get to all of them. And again, if you haven't had a chance to submit your question yet, please feel free to do so. So first off, what groups within a bank typically use this type of transaction management or monitoring solution?
It's a couple of different groups typically. I'd love to say that everybody uses it, and I'd love to see everybody using it, and I hope that we get there someday. Today, it is the IT and the ATM operations or point of sale operations teams that are using INETCO Insight on a daily basis and using the problem isolation and the alerting capabilities of it. And then it's the channel and the marketing teams that are consuming the data and the intelligence that's coming off the back end of the system to optimize the environment. Now, having said that, we have a retail bank customer who I visited a couple of months ago who has the INETCO Insight dashboard screen displayed right outside their executive meeting room. And the executives will actually take a picture of the screen and send it to the operations team if they notice something they don't like. So we're starting to see that usage broaden within the organization.
Excellent. And somebody's asking for, a little bit of extra help here. Can INETCO help me build a customized impact model for my organization? And what about an initial cut at an RFP?
Well, we have a white paper for you. In the next couple of days, we'll be sending out a link to the companion white paper to this, which is actually kind of a greatest hits of RFP questions that we've seen over the last year or so. So we'll certainly share that with you. We have another white paper that's built around business impact models. So both of those are available, but my email address is on here. I would love nothing more than to dive into either of those 2 points with you and do it in a much more interactive way as well.
Next question here is, where is the transaction information actually coming from? So how is the solution actually gathering that?
So this is an important question, and this is one where I guess maybe I'll do a little bit of a history lesson as well, because a number of banks, when they started with transaction monitoring, they started by capturing the journal records off the ATMs or the journal records even off of point-of-sale devices, and that gave kind of a summary of the transactions that occurred on a daily basis. That's become pretty hard to do in a multi-vendor environment. Often those daily records are not quite fast enough for problem resolution. They're missing information like how long the transaction took. And it turns out it's not a very reliable way to get data into a central site. There's a pretty high error rate and miss rate. So that led to kind of a second generation of transaction monitoring where a few companies built systems that could basically clamp onto base 24, take over some processor cycles from the nonstop, and read the transaction logs or the transaction database and kind of present a view off of that. So certainly much more up to the minute in terms of the data that's provided, able to see the transactions, doesn't have that reliance on communication from the ATM necessarily. But to some degree, the way that most banks are betting on their ATM architecture is kind of a bet away from that approach, where value-added services are going out to new web services components or off to third parties as opposed to necessarily being handled by the payment switch. So the systems that run off the switch are beginning to lose visibility into a lot of the new things that are happening in your environment. They're great for deposits and withdrawals, but if you're doing something else that's more interesting and advanced at the ATM, you're going to really struggle to get visibility with the second generation solutions. And so that INETCO Insight, we're capturing the information off the network, which is where every transaction ultimately ends up, regardless of where it goes or how it's handled. So we kind of look at Insight as a third generation approach to this. So Brad, I know that was probably a much longer answer than you had hoped for, but I felt I'd want to be thorough on that one.
It's good to be thorough, and we have more kind of technical questions coming in here too. What are the types of switches, like base 24, Postilion, et cetera, that are supported by INETCO Insight?
So one of the great ways about how Insight works by capturing the data off the network and decoding the transactions there is it really doesn't matter what the switch is. We have customers running base 24, Postilion, Connex, customers who've written their own switching software. It doesn't matter because we're just seeing the messages as they move across the network. So as long as we're able to understand that transaction format, and we've seen hundreds, if not thousands of them, so that shouldn't be an issue.
This next question kind of feeds into that. So how is INETCO Insight able to monitor third-party service providers?
Yeah, so this is a pattern we're seeing where either the ATM is connecting directly to a third-party service or the switch is connecting to a third-party service to add functionality essentially to the ATM environment. In either case, we're going to watch the transaction as it heads off into that third-party service and leaves your premises basically, and then as it comes back in again. And because we're capturing at the network level, we can see how long it took to move from a network standpoint and how long the third party actually took to process the transaction from an application standpoint. So a number of our customers are able to actually have very intelligent dispute resolution conversations, I guess is the nice way to put it, with the third-party service providers. I still remember one of our early retail customers for INETCO Insight spotted some issues with a couple of his stores in American Express cards, and he called up American Express, went through the phone tree that every retail customer gets, and got a hold of someone on the operations desk, sent him a screenshot of what he was seeing in Insight, and the operations person said, "Wow, how did you get that information?" And he said, "Secondly, here's a phone number so you can just reach me directly the next time, because clearly you know what you're talking about." So we've had a lot of success, I guess, is the short version of that story, being able to help customers with their third-party service providers.
And how do you interact with multi-vendor software solutions when some already include their own sophisticated monitoring system?
So we function very, very well in multi-vendor environments because, again, we're agnostic to the device. We just care about the transactions that it's executing. So whether it's a NCR or Diebold or WinCore or Fujitsu ATM, it doesn't really matter. It's going to communicate across the network, and there's a standard way that it's going to do that, or some variation on the standard that it's going to use. Yeah, we are seeing that a number of ATM vendors do have enterprise management systems designed for their fleet of ATMs or point-of-sale devices. Those are typically, when you look under the covers, very device-centric and very light in terms of the transaction data that they're able to pull. If they are able to pull transaction data, it's typically very straightforward records. It often does include things like response time, and it certainly wouldn't get into the more advanced value-added services that a lot of people are starting to do at their ATMs.
And a question comes in, just I guess a proof point, wondering if we can name any banks within the South Gulf region using INETCO Insight, or part of the kind of INETCO or NCR triple play kind of initiative.
Oh boy, so this is going to test my geography. So I'll give you a couple of INETCO Insight customers in Middle East and Africa, and then then let whoever asked that question throw the pins on the map and see if I'm right or not. So National Bank of Abu Dhabi is a joint customer between NCR and INETCO. They're one that is, you'll find some blogs on our website about them, quotes, etc. Transaction Junction in South Africa is a customer, as is Nedbank in South Africa as well. And then there's a number of others that are in progress in the Gulf region that I can't speak about right now, but there's a number of active opportunities there.
Excellent. And how flexible is the KPI-related reporting system within Insight? Can I customize alerts and analytics that are reported?
Yeah, you get a lot of flexibility around how these can be customized. So within Insight, there's actually a dedicated engine that does all the calculations. So while out of the box, you might get things like how many withdrawals happened at this ATM in the last hour, and be able to forward that statistic on. You can tailor or customize that to anything you could possibly dream of. We have one customer who has probably about 36 KPIs and statistics now, counting all sorts of different transaction types, trying to see how much cash is entering and leaving their ATMs, even monitoring the performance of certain marketing campaigns as they're being deployed at the various ATM locations.
And another question, can you correlate transaction information from multiple sources? So, for example, somebody using a mobile banking application and then moving to banking at an ATM.
Yeah, we can certainly do that type of correlation because we're picking up individual fields in the transaction messages. That type of correlation, whether it's taking a customer ID across channels, et cetera, very straightforward to do. One of the use cases we're starting to see roll out in the ATM environment, for instance, is using your mobile device to stage a cash withdrawal, walking up to an ATM, is basically taking a photo of the barcode for the ATM on the screen, and it automatically dispenses the cash. Now that's a kind of a cross-channel or an omni-channel transaction where, again, if you're only monitoring what's happening on the switch, you're only seeing the cash withdrawal component of that. With INETCO Insight, you're able to see both aspects of that interaction.
And typically, how does one get started with transaction monitoring analytics?
Well, one of the best ways to get started is really to kind of think back to where I started with this presentation about getting clear on your business case, getting clear on what it is you're trying to change or evolve or grow about your environment and what that trigger for investment might be. Now, we can often help you work through that process interactively, so I'd encourage you to either engage your INETCO rep or your NCR sales rep to do that. Brad, I also noticed I've had a couple of questions come directly to me over chat that you might not be seeing, so maybe I'll go through each of those here. One of them was, I'll kind of paraphrase a little bit, do we have a set of filters out of the box for the type of data we're looking for and the type of conditions we're looking for, or can they be customized by the user? The answer is kind of both or yes twice. So when you put INETCO Insight in place, we will typically leave you with a set of half a dozen or a dozen alerts tailored for your environment, but you can trigger and tune those however you want. So it's a combination of, usually as part of the install and configuration process, we are going to set you up with some of the basic best practices that we see across our customer base, and then you're free to modify those and change them as you want. The question here wanted some insight into whether, I love it when people use the product name as a verb, it's great. If Insight can monitor large payment files through a workflow process submitted by high-value clients. I'm glad this question was asked because this is one of the really unique capabilities in Insight, which is not only are we a real-time transaction monitor, but we can also monitor a business process that unfolds over several minutes or even half an hour, for instance, and monitor the steps through that. I don't have a demo that I can show you today because we're not really set up for a demo on this, but there's a great example in our demo files of showing someone interacting with an e-commerce website and walking through a purchasing process, and you can see each step of that process and what the sync time was between it and how successful it was, et cetera. So we have a unified transaction model that allows us to model not just single transactions, but entire workflows or processes. So to Neil, who asked that question, happy to get into a lot more detail on that. If you want to email me about this separately or you want to set up a demo to look into that, happy to do that. Okay, and Brad, those are the private questions I saw come in.
Okay, excellent. And I think we're bumping up to the time that we said that we'd be taking here. So I just want to thank everybody for the questions and for joining us today. Again, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar, so if you have any additional questions that you think of in regards to the information that we've gone through today, don't hesitate to send them to Mark, whose email is on the slide, or to myself, and my email was on the meeting invite that went out. And with that, thanks again, and wish you all a great rest of your day.